Welcome, everyone, and welcome to this evening's Next Level Live, where we tune in each week to bring you interviews with powerful leaders who will inspire you into reaching your next level in life. This evening, we want to welcome Justin Schenck. Justin, thank you so much for being here. It's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I'm excited.
It's going to be awesome. Justin Schenck is an entrepreneur and the host of Inc. Magazine's top-rated podcast, The Growth Now Movement. He also travels all around the country speaking on overcoming adversity. So super accomplished and excited to learn from you this evening.
Yeah, thank you. And look, hey, I just had you on my podcast. We did the interview yesterday. It comes out in a couple of weeks. So I'm excited about that too. So all my audience can see your amazing message as well.
Oh, thanks. I love it. Back and forth. It's good stuff. So wonderful. So tell me, so you got into the Growth Now podcast and movement in 2016. That's just a couple of years ago.
Yeah, it seems like yesterday, and it seems like a lifetime ago, right? Like so much has changed since then. But started podcasting 4.5 years ago, not really knowing where it would go, really what the power of the medium that it was. And really kind of lost in that time frame. And over time was able to figure it out, and now have been able to build a brand and a business around it. And it's been quite the journey. I mean, 4.5 years ago, I would tell people I had a podcast, and the response was, "What's a podcast?" And now you say it and everybody goes, "Oh yeah, you too." So I mean, the world has changed in the podcast realm for sure.
Oh my gosh. But so you were like one of the original, like the OGs of the podcast world, it sounds like.
I wish I was. Like, I think that like there's tiers, right? Like I was the OG of every entrepreneur having one, but podcasting has been around for a really, really long time. Like once radio started slipping, everybody kind of turned to podcasting about 10 years ago. I would say if I was doing it for 10 years, I would have been lucky and I struck gold, right? It's like those first people on Twitter that like just blew up because they got their name as a handle. Unfortunately, I didn't do that, but over time and consistency with the show, I've been able to grow an audience, which is cool.
That's so awesome. We'll call you the second wave. You're the second wave. Awesome. Beautiful. Wow. So but you've done a lot. I mean, you've come a long way in these last 4 years. Like you went from I remember speaking with you about a year and a half ago about your podcast, and it had really, like in the last year when we were speaking about a year ago, really taken off to where you're getting invited to speak, keynote speak, just be involved in a lot of like primetime type stuff that hadn't currently been available to you, and your journey in that. So tell us a little bit about how it all started and how you got into it.
Yeah. So like I said, I started it 4.5 years ago. The idea came about 5 years ago. And I had a co-host at the time, and we're like, hey, let's launch this podcast and try and figure out business by interviewing top entrepreneurs and really pick their brain about how they did it. Because at this point in my life, I was about 30 years old at the time, and I had 3 failed businesses under my belt. And I was like, I don't want to fail again. So I have to find a way not to fail. And so the idea behind the podcast originally was, all right, let's learn from entrepreneurs, and maybe 1 or 2 people listen along the way. That was really what we said. And then 5 months before the podcast launched, everything changed in my life. So there was I got that phone call really that nobody wants to get. And it was my sister that called me and said, the doctor says you need to come. And so I took a 7.5-hour drive. I was up in Cape Cod at the time, drove down to South Jersey, and my mom was intubated in a hospital bed. And that was the day she lost her 20-year battle to opioids. And what that did for me was change my entire perspective of life. Like I was, that driven individual who I did well in the corporate world, but I wanted this entrepreneurial kind of clout. So people go, hey, look at Justin. Like he's done well. He came from a place where he shouldn't be doing well, and he's doing that. And I wanted that. And when my mom passed away, I realized that life has nothing to do with that. It has nothing to do with the money, the cars, the houses, the whatever, right? It really is about enjoying the journey and the process and finding joy even in the moments where life isn't that great. And then that's where my journey began. And if you go back early on in the podcast, you notice that my co-host is talking about business, and I'm picking people's brains about their rock bottom moments, about self-love, about what's your mindset in those rock bottom moments. And that was really the beginning of my own personal journey, of me trying to figure that out for myself, to figure out what is life really all about, and how do I, number one, help myself? And then once I help myself, how do I help others? And so my messaging and my purpose all fell in line. And about a year and a half into the show, I asked my co-host to take a step back. It was actually, I think it was 62 episodes in, was his last episode. And I relaunched the show just as myself. And I realized that when everything was in line, like when I was living in my purpose, when I was speaking from the heart, when I was vulnerable about my story and my journey and all of these things, people started to show up and they started to listen and they started to tell their friends, and all this growth started to happen organically. And then what ended up happening was Inc. magazine listed me as a top 8 podcast, and everything kind of blew up. Like I woke up one day, it was actually, here's the crazy thing. So my mom passed away November 15th, 2016. 2015, she passed away. Sorry. And it was November 15th, 2017 that the Inc. article hit. And so it was on the 2-year anniversary of my mom's death that everything changed for me. And when I started to get national notoriety and started to get asked to speak at events, and then everything kind of grew from there. A business launched from there organically, and so much more.
Wow. That's a really like deep and profound story, and like speaks to getting real with yourself about like what is actually the importance of what you're up to and like your why. I feel it sounds like you really got clear on what your why was as an entrepreneur and as somebody who is putting this content out there.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, everybody, I think it was Simon Sinek who was like, start with why, right? And it became this kind of fancy thing that everybody said, go find your why, go find your why. And I didn't know what the heck that meant. Like, I was like, no, like, it doesn't matter what my why is. What matters is making money and paying bills and doing cool things. And it became so much more than that. Like I said, it became an inward journey for myself to discover, like, why am I here? Like, why am I on this path? Why hasn't it been easy? And what have I learned from it, right? Like, I have a good friend and mentor in Ed Milet who says all the time, life is happening for you, not to you. And when you hear that, you go, wow, everything is truly happening for me, but it's up to me to figure out what that means. What's my mindset when I do hit those rock bottom moments? And guess what? I have all these conversations and they talk about their biggest rock bottom moment at the end of that conversation. But there's more than one rock bottom moment. There's more than one falling down. Like, it's a constant growth path that we have to choose. And we have to understand that if we focus on the growth, if we focus on that 1% incremental wins every single day, you're going to live a life that's extraordinary. Because the amount of movement you can make in a year, 2 years, 3 years becomes unbelievable. We just get lost in the idea right now with social media and everything being at the push of a button that we think it has to happen right away. Like the honest thing is, like, I was podcasting every single Tuesday for 2 years before anything really took off. But I showed up, number one, for myself, which is what we need to do. Like, everybody needs to show up for themselves. And then number two, when the audience started to grow and they started to reach out, I realized I had to show up for them. There was a moment in time early on in the podcast when it wasn't growing. And I was like, well, what am I really doing? Like, why do I keep showing up? The show's not growing. It's a lot of work. Like, all these things go into it. And somebody reached out to me right around that time. And they said, because of this specific episode that was on your show, I decided not to take my life. And I realized in that moment, whether it was one person listening or a million people listening, I had to show up. I had to show up with the right message, and hopefully the right person hears it and it saves a life. And I really believe even if you save one life, you change the world.
Wow, that's so powerful. I love it. And that like fueled you to keep going and to be like a continuously show up, be consistent, and to make a difference in the world.
Yeah.
That's super powerful. Awesome. So so initially you started Growth Now as an entrepreneurial focus, and then you got more into, it sounds like, emotional intelligence and vulnerability and authenticity. Have you found in your interviews with people that really you need both to be successful in business?
Oh yeah, for sure. Like, if there's no emotional intelligence, if there's no understanding of other people's feelings, of your own feelings, of all these things, you're not going to go anywhere, right? It becomes this, I don't want to say struggle, but it becomes a balancing act of like, how are you serving yourself and how are you serving your business, right? Like, so I make sure that I take care of myself first. What does that mean? Like, I want to make sure my cup is full. I want to make sure that I am at the top of my game, whether it be mentally, physically, emotionally, in my relationships, in my business, and all of these things. And so one of the things that I picked up on about 2 or 3 years into the show as I was having these interviews, I realized there was a theme. And the theme was every single person that I admire, whether it be by their story or their success in business or their success in life, the one theme that between all of them was the same was they took care of themselves first, meaning they had a routine or they had things they did daily that filled their cup to make sure that they were at their peak. I was somebody who always constantly poured from an empty cup. And I know a ton of people do this because they want to help and they feel like if they help, they're going to feel better. But the reality is you need to help yourself. And we so rarely do that. And when I started to fill my own cup, not only did I feel better, but I realized my impact became greater, right? Like I realized when I took care of my wounds first, I was able to help other people in such a bigger and more massive way.
That's so awesome. Yeah, I mean, and that's what we find over and over again with Next Level, and that's why we have the trainings and the tools, and we just see people take off with their visions and their passions in the world and their ability to create and succeed. And it's cool to speak with you because you're interviewing people like Ed Milet, you're interviewing people like the boss lady, the boss bitch, right? That we spoke about the other day.
Yeah. Yeah.
But like, who are some of the people that you've enjoyed interviewing the most?
It's such a hard question. I mean, over 300 interviews, and I've been able to speak to some incredible people, and I've enjoyed every single conversation. Obviously, there's certain ones where relationships and friendships have really taken off because we've connected on such a deep level. And, somebody like Fabio Viviani from America's Top Chef, who's become a great friend of mine. I mean, we've been able to connect on a deep level, which has been amazing. Trent Shelton, who's become a friend of mine, and just so many incredible people that I've been fortunate enough to connect with. And here's what I really realized. There was a moment, and I shared with you the other day that I want to cancel every interview right before I do it because I get nervous, right? But I realized if I approach anything, any relationship, any business transaction, anything with a mindset of giving first, everything else works itself out. And so one thing that I do with most of my conversations, if not all of them, I end it with, let me know how I can help you. And I'd say a majority of the people never tell me. But then the people that tell me, I find a way to help them. Even if it's not in my wheelhouse, I know somebody who can help them, or I might be able to point them in the right direction. I'm able to help them. And the crazy thing is that has come back around so much more powerfully of people helping me. Not even by asking. It's like I help and all of a sudden the universe comes back around and said, here you go, Justin. Right. And I realize that there's so much power in relationships. And people ask me all the time, like, how cool is it that people listen to your podcast all over the world? How cool is it that you reached over a couple million people? Like, and they ask me all these things. I go, honestly, the cool thing is the deep connections that I can make with people now because I've understood and learned the art of relationship building through the podcast. And I understood that, like, when you approach something from an idea of giving and you're able to give, like everything else changes. And so that's really been really powerful for me. But again, I mean, amazing people. Gabby Bernstein's been on the show. That was an incredible, I mean, she ended up getting a reading from my mom after the interview. Like there was just crazy moments in my life where I'm like, oh my gosh, like wow. I just got a spiritual reading from Gabby Bernstein because I decided to buy a microphone 4.5 years ago. I've been able to experience some really cool stuff.
That's so cool. It's so cool. And it also speaks to the fact that, like, oftentimes when we start off on these ideas that we have, like these visions, these inspirations, we don't know where the path is going to take us, right? But if our heart's in the right place and if we keep taking the committed action and doing things for the right reasons, like as opposed to like you cut your business partner, you cut ties with your business partner because their focus was really like more the look of things and making the money and like the title of entrepreneur versus like the heart and the soul and the conversations that you really wanted to have, which were meaningful. Right. When you take inspired action, like things are going to happen that you have no idea. Like you couldn't have written this in the book, but because you took the inspired action, you didn't give up and you stayed open and you kept being a giver. Like the universe has opened up massive opportunities for you.
Yeah. And I love the fact that you use the term action. Like, so I'll go back a little bit in my story. And if you look at me in high school, right, I had a 1.7 GPA at one point. My mom was in the middle of a 20-year opioid addiction and my dad was in jail. And so if you look at that, all signs pointed to you've got no shot, kid. Like, I think the statistics are if your parent's an addict, you have a 50% chance of being an addict. If your parent's in jail, you have a 50% chance of being in jail. And so really it's 100% screwed. Like, there's no, like, let's do the math, right? But when I was 19, somebody handed me a book called Who Moved My Cheese? And it changed my perspective. I totally
read that. Amazing.
It's so good. It's so good. And it was the perfect introduction book for me into self-development, because I'm not a huge reader. So it's an easy read, but it also spoke to my life. Like, it spoke to the idea that things are going to happen around me. Change is going to happen. Bad things are going to happen. And it doesn't matter. What matters is how I react to that stuff. Now, the thing was, at the age of 19, I began this journey of self-development, but I didn't start taking action until I was about 30 or 31. I would just keep absorbing information. I'd go to events and get the high of an event. I'd read a book and feel really good and really smart for a minute. I'd listen to a podcast and I'd surround myself with the right people. And I had all those fun, fuzzy moments, but I'd find myself back exactly where I was before, feeling unfulfilled, feeling unhappy, and trying to fill these holes in my life by doing, stupid stuff. Like, that's just the reality, right? And so fast forward, I sat down with myself and I was like, what are you doing wrong? Like, what are you missing here? You're doing all the things, or you're doing the things you thought you had to do, right? Like, surround yourself with the people, keep learning. And I went, oh, I'm not putting into action what I'm learning. And nice. So once I made that shift, everything started to change, right? Like, I was learning about how to do a podcast better, but I wasn't doing those things. I knew how to do it. I just wasn't doing it. And then I started to do it. And then it started to work. Started to listen to my coaches and my mentors and the people in my masterminds. And I was like, oh, this all makes sense. This actually works. But it's really about the action. The first step is figure out who you are and what it is you're supposed to put out in the world. The second thing is start to put in the action the things that you've learned. And I was missing that for a really, really long time. Now, obviously, I can go back and say, hey, let me change this. I wish I knew this at 21 or 24 or 25. But the reality is I needed to learn those lessons in the time that I needed to learn them. I'm not in any rush. I'm not look, the end of this life, all of us end up in the same place, and that's dead. And so I better enjoy the journey, and I better look back at my life and go, wow, like, I've experienced some really cool things in my life, and I've done some really cool things. And I've impacted some lives, and that's all that matters. Because here's the one thing I've really learned through this business journey, through interviewing all these amazing people, is that, like, you can have a goal of making $1 million. And I encourage you to set massive goals for yourself and understand where you're going. But at the same time, I will promise you, when you get to that $1 million or those 1 million followers on social media, you're going to go, okay, how do I get to 10 million? There's no real satisfaction in those goals, but yes, we have to constantly grow and we have to constantly push ourselves. And that's really the key, is to understand how can we enjoy every single moment along the way.
That's so awesome. Yeah, that's so great. That's such a good reminder for everybody, like, no matter where we're at in our process. And also, I think, like, it is important that we are taking action, even if we're not like slave driving ourselves to the finish line, right? But if we're not actually taking one foot in step, and putting one foot in front of the other, we don't actually get those downloads. We don't actually get those inspiration points where we're like, oh, this is actually what's possible for me. And, like, this is why I was doing all of that, right? So it is that interesting balance between it's like inspired action and, like, not resting on your laurels, but enjoying the process.
Yeah, no, for sure. And that's why I talk about growing 1% every single day. Because look, big goals are scary too. Like I host a live event. Last year was the first time that I hosted it. And this year became virtual because of COVID, like everybody else in the world. But I hosted this live event, and the big vision for this event, as COVID hopefully dissipates at some point and we can do it again, is one day I want to fill an arena. But if I sat down where I was when I said, okay, let me plan this whole thing out, and I said, this year I'm going to fill an arena, it might not be possible. And then all of a sudden I'm going to start talking myself out of it, right? That's the big goal still. I'm going to fill an arena. But I went, okay, what's a realistic goal to be the first step to get there? And I said, cool, I want to fill a room of 150 people. That's what I want to do. So I ended up selling 160 tickets to people in 16 states in Canada. And they all came to my little town of Reading, Pennsylvania. And they were able to see amazing speakers, have a ton of great connection, had a great time, did all of these things. And the goal, again, still the big goal, is to fill the arena. But you have to take it step by step. very rarely in life, and I'm sure there are moments that people have, but very rarely do you go from 0 to a million overnight, right? It's very, very hard. So we have to be realistic about the things that we're doing. But at the same time, I think visualizing and making sure you know where you're going and to be able to feel it and smell it and feel like you're already, like if I already know what it's like to stand on that stage of this arena, but I already know in that visualization, I'm a little bit older, a little bit wiser. You know, I don't think internally too, I'm ready for that, right? Like I still have a ton of work to do on my own. And that's just the reality, but one day I will be, and one day we will, but one step at a time, 1% at a time.
Oh my gosh, it's so cool. And I mean, considering it, like the Growth Now movement live, right? The Growth Now live movement experiences, but this is the second year that you did it, right? So you went, was it 2 or 3 that just occurred?
So number 2 just happened virtually. The first year was live, and then we went virtual, and then hopefully by 2021 we'll be live again.
Okay. Yes. Okay. So 20, and we'll have to have you back on the show closer to when the next, movement is, so that we can invite people to it, because I'm sure it's going to be awesome. But really, it seems like every year, these first 2 years, you've really you've grown a lot from year to year, right? And so I imagine that next year, like you'll probably have 500 people in person, right? Or 1,000 people in person, or, it's incremental. I've watched Lewis Howes also grow his in-person events, and he's kind of done a similar thing where he's like, all right, next year we'll have 500 people, and the year after we'll have 1,000, and after that 2,000. So it's cool to see the progression, and actually it's really cool to see how quickly it has been coming together for you. That's really extraordinary.
It's really kind of mind blowing, right? Like it's funny because it has happened quickly. Like I really only started it. Obviously the podcast started 4.5 years ago, but I really only started the entrepreneurial journey just shy of 3 years ago. Wow. The event itself was, I made the decision really quickly after launching into like a full-time entrepreneurship of like, okay, I want to do a live event. I'll just set it out pretty far. And I think it was like a year in, that's like, I'll do it. And the goal was to double it in size every single year. I wanted to go from 150 to 300 to 600, and so on and so forth. And it's funny that you mentioned Lewis's event, because I've been to every one except for the last one that he did. Mm-hmm. And I saw the growth. And I also you also have to understand where you're at in the whole grand scheme of things. Sure. Like Lewis is doing probably 10 times the amount of downloads that I'm doing on his podcast.
Yeah. And
he had 300 people at his first event. So if he's doing 10 times the amount of downloads and I got half of what he got at the first event,
it's amazing.
We're headed in the right direction, right? And I'm not saying that to impress anybody or anything like that. I'm saying it to impress upon every single person that if I can do it, like anybody can do it. That's the reality. And I think it was funny because I used to say a lot, and I've stopped saying it, but it's true. Like, I want people to look at me and say, well, if that idiot could do it, I could do it too, right? Because there's certainly nothing special about me. I just decided to show up in my truth and put in the work and put in the effort and make the right connections. And then the pieces started to fall into place. And now I'm fortunate enough again to run a mastermind and coach individuals and do the live event and speak all over the country. And it's been such a blessing in my life because I decided to show up.
It's super, super inspiring. And I will say your authenticity, it's so clear that you're a master at what you do. I mean, being interviewed by you yesterday and listening to you speak, you're made for this actually. So it's super, super cool that you're on this journey. And I'm curious for you. I mean, I know you're following your vision and it's unfolding, but where do you see yourself in 5 years from now?
Yeah. So this question's interesting. I mentioned the goal of the event to grow year over year and the impact to grow year over year. But I don't have a really solid vision of where I'm going to be other than this. I know I'm going to be myself, just more abundant. So I'm going to be able to be more abundant financially so I can give more. I'm going to be more abundant in my reach so I can reach more people. And for me, it's all about how many lives can I impact? And so, yes, it could shift, and it has shifted over the last 2.5 years, my messaging and what's important at the moment. And but at the same time, the goal is to always become more and more abundant year over year so I can give more year over year. And so 5 years from now, I'm more than likely still going to be living in Reading, Pennsylvania. That's a whole nother subject that'll take 20 minutes to explain, but I'll probably still be in Reading, Pennsylvania. And I'm going to be pursuing my dreams and impacting some people along the way. I found out in 2017 that I could no longer set goals for financial things. Whenever I chased money, it eluded me. And so in 2017, in the beginning of the year, I said, by the end of this year, I want to feel like I belong having the conversations with the people that I get to have these conversations with. And by the end of 2017, the Inc. article hit, which really was an acknowledgement to the craft that I've been able to hone and get better at over the years. In 2018, I said, I want to be at the table. And at the end of 2018, I went to Lewis Howe's event, but I shared an Airbnb with Nick Santanastasso, who now speaks with Tony Robbins all over the world, and Justin Wren, who's a Bellator MMA fighter, and Steve Weatherford, and all of these people. And we watched the Conor McGregor fight. And sorry, Lewis, instead of going to the after party, we went back to the house to watch the Conor McGregor fight. and it's funny because I sat there and I went, oh my gosh, like I'm at the table. Like I've made it. This goal has become real. In 2019, I set the table with my event. And then 2020, this year, obviously COVID has skewed some things, but my goal was to be invited to the table, be invited to others' tables, to be able to reach out to their audience, to inspire their audience. And just the other day, or just the other month, David Meltzer invited me onto his podcast. And so I've been able to really set an intention in my life, more than goals, but a true intention that was in line with my purpose and in line with what I wanted to do. And it's been able to deliver. And that was just, again, those incremental growth steps and those wins that I've been able to have along the way, which always ends with that, okay, there's an acknowledgement to the hard work that I'm putting in.
It's very, very cool. Absolutely. I love it. I love it. And it's, again, that balance of having a vision and an intention, taking the action, but not being so attached to, exactly what it looks like. Because who knows? I mean, we want to leave opportunity for the university to surprise us, right?
Right. Yeah. I certainly didn't think 4.5 years ago when I started the podcast that this would be the business, that this would be the thing that I'm doing. So you have to be open to the world and what it's showing you, for sure, because you don't really know what the opportunity truly is. But again, you have to take the action. So many people are sitting there right now and they might be thinking, and I can't tell you how many times I've heard it, but I should start. I wanted to start a podcast for the last 3 years. Well, think about where you would have been if you did start it 3 years ago. You know what I mean? And so you have to take the action, and then the universe will deliver whatever else is supposed to deliver for you.
The other thing that I want to hit on in your message, because I think it's important for people to have awareness of, is when you first started off, and you even mentioned before every interview you want to cancel, right? So it's your mind creeps up on you. It does the same thing that it did from when you were a kid, and whatever happened during childhood, right? That makes us feel like we're not enough or whatever. But you started taking the action, even despite your internal conversations. And as you've continued to take the actions, you have shown yourself that you're actually capable, and the universe has responded in such a way that it's actually now people are inviting you to be on their podcast. So will you speak into that shift a little bit? Because I think a lot of people get stuck in feeling wow, I just can't do this. I'm not good enough.
Yeah.
That really
we talked
back.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about it when you were on my show. We talked about how your brain is there to protect you, right? So it doesn't want you to get unsafe. You don't want to get uncomfortable. And your brain's telling you no when you want to say yes. And I realized that our body has a regulator in it. You know how cars have a regulator? Yes, the speedometer might go to 200 miles an hour, but your car's not going to go over 135. And that's for the safety of the car and yourself driving it. Well, your body has one of those. And the only way to break through that regulator is by getting uncomfortable, by putting yourself in situations around people that are at a higher level than you, continuing to learn, doing all these things that are going to be able to kind of bump that regulator up. But the real thing is the regulator will always be there. It's up to you to make sure you keep knocking it up a little bit, a little bit, a little bit. And that's how you level up. And so I realized a long time ago that if I want to continue to go down this path and pursue my dreams and to really make the impact that I want to make, I have to keep bumping it up. And yeah, no matter what interview I do, I've known you personally, we've had lunch, we've done all these things, but I was still nervous and still had that moment of, I should just cancel it. But the idea is every single time I want to cancel and I don't, the regulator bumps up a little bit. And that's everything in life. Like for me to put it out there that I was going to do this event and I wanted people to come and I had no idea if anybody was going to come, like that's scary. And to do it time and time again is the only thing that's going to like get me to where I want to be. And I've realized along the way that getting uncomfortable, pushing through your fear is the only way you're going to raise that thing. And you're going to be able to then go pursue your dreams, make more money, impact more lives, surround yourself with the right people. And that's when they let you in.
Oh, it's so cool. Very, very cool. Awesome. Well, I'm going to share your website so that people can see what you're up to, listen to your podcast. It's on iTunes. It's on all the biggies. Yeah. Is it on Spotify as well?
Yeah, it's on all the things. Wherever you listen to podcasts, it's there.
Awesome. Awesome. Great. And then, so what's your like social media handles if people want to follow your journey?
Yeah, the best thing to follow me on is Instagram. So it's at Justin T. Schenck. I know it's a weird spelling, so you can see it here with a T in the middle. That's my username on Instagram. So please go follow me there. And yeah, check out the podcast. And if you like what you hear, just click the subscribe button and follow along. I'm on this journey with everybody else. And I realize that like on this particular journey, I might be 4 years ahead of where you want to be, but I'm still growing. Like all it is a journey. So please come along and join this journey with me, and hopefully we'll have some fun along the way.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you so much this evening. I'm super lit up and excited to push myself out of my comfort zone every day. It's awesome.
I love it. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.